Who's has beautiful smiles, so welcome. It is officially 4 o'clock, 4:01 actually. My clock just changed. And I'm going to suggest that we go ahead and get started if that's okay. We're good? Okay. So welcome again to Conscious Cocktails, Higher Purpose. This is today is part of our Higher Purpose series. And today is about putting your money where your mouth and your heart and your mind is. So I love it. I'm looking forward to this discussion today. For those of you who do not know me, I am Ebony Adams Monk, president of C3MD. And again, I'm very glad to see all of your smiling faces here today. If you haven't already, introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us where you're tuning in from. Tell us if you're new. Tell us how you heard about us. And for those of you who are new, I would like to talk about our mission. So C3MD is a purpose-driven business community. We promote the power of capitalism to create positive change, do good, and elevate humanity. We inspire and equip individuals and organizations to embrace and implement conscious business principles through collaboration, educational programming, practical tools, and strategic partnerships. And our principles are stakeholder orientation, conscious leadership, conscious culture, and today, higher purpose. These conscious events began more than a year ago in 2020. And this month's topic, around higher purpose and investing, we will be walked through the ESG, central factors in measuring sustainability and impact of investment. And so I know you are all interested in learning about what the S and the G are. I'm not going to spoil it. I will let our speaker talk about that today. So before we kick this off, I want to make sure that everyone has some kind of conscious cocktail, whatever your beverages of choice. I've got herbal tea here. Some of you may be drinking wine or iced tea or something spicier. A glass of water will do. Just make sure that everyone has a drink. And I want to give a special thank you to Sobar, who is one of our C3MD nonprofit members who provides creative and really cool beverage alternatives to alcohol. And for today's event, they offered a special deal for attendees to purchase a non-alcoholic conscious cocktail. So thank you to Sobar for always partnering with us. And I really encourage you, if you haven't been to Sobar's website, go out there. They've got some pretty interesting drinks. And so I'm actually looking forward to ordering from Sobar soon. Okay, so I am going to stop talking so we can get through the rest of this event. And I'm going to turn it over to Liz. You're on mute.
Mute, sorry. Sorry about that. There's a lot of noise in the background, so I apologize if my speaker and microphone and intercom go nuts in my office, so sorry. I'm just wanted to talk a little bit about membership. So if you're interested in becoming a member, please visit our website, and there's a lot more information there. But in a nutshell, we have 3 levels of membership. You can sign up as an individual, which is $99 a year, or small business at $250 a year, or corporate membership at $500, which is for employers with 25 people or more. And the benefits of becoming a member are discounted meeting fees, discounted tickets to C3MD hosted conferences and seminars, online membership directory profile, access to conscious capitalism resources, trusted advisors and business professionals, and also collaboration with local peers working to apply the conscious capitalism principles in your business, and being a part of a community that's strengthening, growing, and evolving in the Central Maryland business ecosystem. And also in the future, there'll be an opportunity to participate in mentoring roundtable events. And you can use the Conscious Capitalism of Central Maryland logo on your website. Again, visit our website if you'd like any more information about that. And now I'm going to introduce Tanya, who's going to be our presenter for today.
Liz, before you do that, will you give a shout out to our sponsors?
Oh, yes. So thank you to our sponsors for helping make today's event possible, which are Kevin Howard, CPA, and Pickled Roots Publishing, who Ebony has just released a book called Leading Wise. Do I have that title right? And am I missing it? And Sobar, yes, Leading Wise, and again, Sobar. So thank you very much. So Tanya, you're up.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Liz, and thanks, Ebony. And I believe that a copy of that book is going to be raffled off at the end of this session. So stay tuned if you're want to get a copy of that. I'm excited to read it. Well, thank you all for coming. The title of my session, our conversation today is Put Your Money Where Your Mouth and Your Mind and Your Heart Is. It's been true for a while that you can invest in your values. You can literally put your money where your mouth and your heart is. It's really from my favorite quote. Authenticity occurs when the head and the heart meet at the lips. When what we think and what we feel is congruent with what we say and do. And that's from Dr. Carl Hammerschlag, a speaker and a healer. Recently, many companies and money managers have been talking about sustainability and stakeholder capitalism. It really struck me at how many investment presentations I've been in where this topic has been come up, especially mentioning stakeholder capitalism. So we thought that at this Conscious Cocktails at Conscious Capitalism, this would be a good place to have a conversation about what it is, the history, what data is available, what the challenges are to implementing it, and how you can do it. So I'm going to share my screen. Slideshow going. Can everybody see that?
Great.
And I don't know what view would be best for you if you wanted in gallery view, speaker view.
It might work in gallery view, and everybody should be able to adjust how large their screen size is. Thanks.
So because this is an investment presentation, I do need to start out with a little bit of a disclaimer. This presentation is for education and your interest. This is not intended to be professional advice from me to you. If you have any tax, legal, or investment questions, you should contact your own advisor. And I need to kind of leave this up for a second. I should also have said that, so I'm Tanya Rapaz. I'm the Senior Financial Advisor at Arthur Stein Financial, a registered investment advisor in Maryland. I've been a certified financial planner since the year 2000, and I've been with either on the board or on the senior leadership team of Conscious Capitalism Central Maryland since 2018. And even though I'm not giving advice, I do want to have your questions. So, please feel free to put them in the chat. The only questions I really won't try to answer are questions about your portfolio or advice about your personal financial situation or anything about any particular investment. Again, this is not intended to be advice, but I hope that it will be a conversation. I've learned a lot about this topic in the past year. So, you might ask a question that we all could learn a lot about. So you may have heard a lot about this. I don't know if everybody has heard a lot about ESG lately. It's really exploded. It's the process that contemplates not just profit, but also people and planet when making investment choices. You may have also heard about this as the triple bottom line. So today we're going to talk about sort of the history of ESG, what's happening now, why so many people are talking about it right now. What are the possibilities? What are the challenges in implementing it? What does it mean for your portfolio? And how would you go about incorporating it? And of course, as Ebony said, first you have to know what the ESG stands for. And growing numbers of companies are reporting on their standing relative to these three factors. And the three factors are E is for environmental. Maybe that's pretty obvious that it's anything having to do with climate change, the use of land, water, energy, sustainability. The S are for social factors, and that's more to do with people, the working conditions, your labor practices, how you treat your people, the diversity, equity, inclusion that you're able to bring into your workplace. And then governance, which is really more about how the company itself is being run, taking a close look at anything having to do with the board makeup, and then the transparency of the board decision-making, and then anything having to do with corruption, following the rules and the laws, and of course, executive pay. Companies are finding, and fund managers and mutual fund managers are finding, that a growing number of investors are demanding information about how companies are stacking up with regard to these factors in their decision-making and their outcome and output in these areas. These are non-financial factors that you consider when making your decisions. And reporting on these factors allows investors to start aligning their values with their investments. But I want to take a step back and sort of talk about the history, because I said at the beginning, you've always been able to make some investments that were outside of the traditional and allowed you to veer into this section of what some people called traditionally maybe socially responsible investing, or values investing, or impact investing. So here is a list of some of the highlights in the history of what a lot of people now are referring to ESG, because it's not just really the environmental side. Bringing in the corporate governance side in terms of looking at these investments is thought now to be equally important in terms of managing the risks of these investments. And of course, these are just a few of the dates that are important in this movement. The earliest investments that you could call ESG were mostly faith-based, and a lot was basically saying, I don't want to put my money towards anything that doesn't align with my values. So the early mutual funds were arranged so that you could avoid investing in anything with tobacco or alcohol, or anything else that was considered to be like a sin stock. But then it kind of expanded. In 1970, the Pax World Fund opened to specifically exclude weapons of war, arms manufacturing. In the 1980s, student activists saw that they could make change around the issue of divestment and anti-apartheid. In 1990, there was the Domini Social Index was launched to start benchmarking your traditional investments versus your socially responsible investments. By 1999, even the Dow Jones was tracking companies that said that they had a sustainability objective. 2006, the United Nations said that responsible investment had to incorporate human rights, labor, and corruption, in addition to an environmental stance. In 2011, the Sustainability Accounting Standard Boards was established, which gave us specific criteria so that in every industry, you could tell which ESG factor would be the most pertinent to that industry to make for better comparisons. Some industries, their carbon footprint is more important than in other industries. Of course, there's the Paris Climate Agreement back on the table. But in 2020, something has changed. I mean, as you know, people have always been able to invest like this, but not like they are now. Records have been breaking for ESG starting in 2020. And of course, you all lived through that year with me. There was the pandemic, which put a spotlight on healthcare and our most vulnerable populations. There was the murder of George Floyd, which also brought our attention to social justice and racial issues. And there's no relief from the reality of climate change. 7 of the 10 hottest years on record since 1881 were in the past 10 years. So this is kind of showing us how investors are right now just pouring money into funds that say that they are either sustainable or have an ESG focus. The past 12 quarters have been amazing. People have just been shoveling money, huge increases to funds with these sustainability objectives. You can kind of see even in 2021, the money is just increasing going forward. So that total investment as of March 2021 is $1,984 billion. And we have more and more choices. This graph shows the new fund launches over the since 2018. They really peaked in the third quarter of 2020. 30 new funds came online that you could invest. And that includes diversified funds, which mimic an index, but maybe take out a few stocks that people don't think align with their values, or can include a single issue offerings, such as funds that only invest in companies that they feel are reaching towards specific impact goals, such as gender diversity or clean energy. And 2021 is still going strong. The biggest launch of all time was the BlackRock US Carbon Transition Readiness, which is an exchange traded fund. It's like a mutual fund, but it trades all day long. In 1 or 2 days, more than $1 million was invested. Almost every stock in the S&P 500 reports on their sustainability practices now. And as people are investing new money, it's almost always in, 1 out of every $3 is invested in something related to these environmental, social, and governance factors. And this is expected to increase as I'm going to get to. Under the prior administration, there was a real chilling effect on whether or not 401k plans and 403 plans could offer an ESG alternative, and that is probably going to be changing. So what are the main reasons that investors screen for ESG? I think we've kind of already been talking a little bit about the moral reasons. As I said, the earliest funds, a lot had a religious bent, but not necessarily, as their investment mandates was to avoid any funds that conflicted with their values, and that was war, gambling, and it's not just liberal funds too. I mean, there are funds that mimic. You can get anything, but it's also possible to now buy funds where you mimic a whole index minus just a couple stocks, such as gun manufacturers. It's also possible, if you have a large enough portfolio, to get an account, and then you mimic the index and then snip out just the stocks rather, that you personally don't want to see in the portfolio. And it's possible that is going to become democratized as time goes on. The second reason that people screen for ESG is because they want to enhance the world. It's kind of a little bit more of the intentional investment, investing in companies that align with the positive changes that they want to see. Now, this is harder and a little bit more expensive because you need to do more research and it requires more data sources. It's a little harder to learn about the startup that is doing the thing that you want, or if you're interested in something like board diversity, then you need to either do the research to find out the makeup of each board, or be subscribing to some service that pulls that data together for you, or investing in funds that are doing that kind of work. But it's the same idea, is that you want to make the world better by investing your dollars. But one thing that I have heard a lot lately, and I want to make this point, is that money managers are starting to say that they want to focus on sustainable investing regardless. That while others may focus on sustainability and assess the environmental, social, and governance risks and opportunities, they're doing so because they want to generate better long-term risk-adjusted returns. Because sustainability is not just about the planet or the people, but it's also about maintaining and conserving in the long run. So sustainable investing focuses on fostering economic development and growth, or, put another way, integrating all of these ESG factors into company analysis and investment decisions would lead you to get to better risk management and potentially lead to better sustainable returns in the long run. Because of the factors that you would consider and the way you would integrate them, and the outcome on portfolios would be a sustainable and a supportable investment approach anyway. They're making the case that this should be pursued by investors whose sole purpose is financial performance, because it puts an emphasis on the long term over the short term, and it takes into account the various stakeholders. So one example that we could think about would be Volkswagen. If you were a shareholder in Volkswagen when their scandal happened, if you remember this a couple, I don't know how long ago it was, but they were cheating the emission standards, which would be upsetting for the stockholders who cared about pollution and emissions. But even for others who weren't as interested in that or were neutral on that, they still had to bear the regulatory risk and the cost of fines and the cost of scrutiny of being a stockholder during that time, and having to bear the risk to the reputation of the company and the harm to the brand. And since then, the company has had to spend a lot of money to overcome the harm to the brand that happened. And they've really had to go hard into embracing electric vehicles. So the idea is that you would avoid these risks, not only for their moral reasons, but also for the financial. And then of course, the fourth reason would be a hope that it would enhance return. The hope that if you invest in companies that treat their employees better, you would retain the best employees who would treat your customers the best. And that would eventually lead to the long-term best performance of your stock. I hope I mentioned that Wendy Baird was going to be managing the chat for questions. So if there are any, let me know.
Not yet, Tanya, but that just brings me to, I wondered about that whole Volkswagen thing. I mean, they're still suffering from that, I think, in some terms. And I think a lot of people thought that they were always one of those safe bets. So you may get to this, but how does one determine if your investments truly are, aligned with your values?
I mean, that is a great question. I mean, I think that might be the essential question, is where do you find the data that lets you know whether the company that you're interested in is truly aligned with your values? I mean, Volkswagen is a great example because their reputation prior, I think, was very good, and it's taken a huge hit. I mean, I think that they have come back a lot because of their embrace of electric vehicles and their promise to get a certain amount of electric vehicles on the market to compete with Tesla.
Thank you.
I mean, ExxonMobil, I guess, is another good example, and it just kind of the different ways that you can pursue your ESG agenda. I mean, thinking back to after the oil spill back in 1989, if you owned, if you didn't feel that ExxonMobil was properly aligning with your values, you could sell it if you owned it, or decline to buy it, or make sure that any funds that you bought in the future didn't own it. But that may not be that satisfying of an answer. I mean, the stock price didn't even really go down that much, didn't really go down in 1989. So the other thing you could do is, number two, look for other alternatives. Maybe invest in renewables, look for other companies. But another thing that has kind of emerged, and this was the big story from the end of last month and the beginning of this month, is shareholder actions. If you are a shareholder in a company or a stockholder in a large investment firm that owns stock in that company, as a shareholder, can you make a difference? So in 2016, the shareholders made a resolution to ExxonMobil asking them to start reporting on the effect of climate change on their business. And at that time, only 38% of the shareholders said yes. They tried it again the next year, and the number shot up to 62. So I think that that gave the shareholders some confidence that shareholders could make a difference. So there was a huge story, and you may have seen it. I think it was pretty big, that a small hedge fund company made an attempt to get some climate activists on the board of ExxonMobil. And it was a pretty contentious fight. The board fought it very hard. The CEO personally lobbied against it. He threatened to cut the dividend for all shareholders. But because this hedge fund was able to loop in the largest shareholders, the large pension funds and BlackRock and Vanguard, who have large stakes, by the time the 8K was filed in June, there were 3 climate activists on the board. Now, it's hard to say whether this is going to make a big difference, but it's the whole idea is that ExxonMobil is a huge part of our economy. And when, you know, the name of the hedge fund was Engine Number One, and they made a case to all the shareholders that Exxon was not doing a good enough job of taking care of their investment by not making a quick enough switch to renewables. And it did make enough of a difference. You know, the case that they made was good enough that there's actually 3 climate activists as board members now at ExxonMobil. I mean, it's a huge story. I mean, probably unthinkable just a couple years ago, if you think of how much ExxonMobil has spent on lobbying efforts.
Tanya, there was a question for you. Jen said, my 401k plan offers no sustainable investment options. How can we advocate for such offerings?
That's a great question. I think that they probably are going to be coming. There was under the prior administration, the Department of Labor strongly discouraged any ESG offerings in 401k plans and 403b plans. But the Biden administration has put out an order to suspend that rule immediately and to look into that immediately. So that probably will be changing soon.
And then there's another question too. Do you have any thoughts on an ETF that focuses on ESGs? This is from our friend Josh. He said ESGU is the one that he knows, and it's doubled in value over the last 4 years. And can you explain to us what those acronyms mean?
What was the one? Can you
so ETF, it's exchange traded fund. Is that right, Josh?
Oh yeah. Okay. But what was the other thing?
ESGU is the fund.
He was wondering if just about your thoughts on exchange traded funds that focus on ESG, what you're talking about. And he said that he knows of one and it's doubled in value over the last 4 years, regardless of COVID.
Yeah, it's been a great, I mean, the performance of certain ESG funds, mutual funds and exchange traded funds, some of them have been amazing over this past 4 years, that's great. I mean, over the past 18 months, it's been great. I mean, when you go to buy an investment, you can buy it through a mutual fund, and an exchange traded fund is very similar. They're both baskets of securities. The exchange traded fund just trades all day long. You buy it on an exchange. Now, usually you can buy them for no fee, depending on where you buy your stocks. ESGU, I'm not really familiar with that particular investment, but exchange traded funds are a great way for small investors to invest.
Great, thanks.
And there was a lot of other news this month too. I'm just going to mention it briefly because that Exxon story was so huge. It kind of crowded out some of the other stories. Chevron and ConocoPhillips are also both energy companies, and their boards also voted, or I'm sorry, their shareholders also voted that they were going to have to start reporting on their Scope 3 emissions, which is how their customers use their oil products and how those emissions are going. And then a Netherlands court decided that Shell, which had another oil company, which had been holding itself out as the basically the leader among energy companies for cutting emissions, because they plan to do a 20% cut over 10 years. Climate activists sued. A judge agreed with them that it wasn't fast enough or deep enough. So they're going to be cutting their emissions faster. They specifically mentioned the duty of care that Shell had to the world. Chipotle, their executive compensation is now going to be tied to specific ESG metrics, not just the E, getting their food from local growers, but also the S. Part of his compensation is going to be tied to how many women and people of color are going to be promoted above the restaurant level. And then we're going to expect to see changes in financial services at many levels. President Biden did an executive order ordering a review of climate change's impact on financial assets across the board. So I think we're going to see a lot. Oh, by the way, McDonald's and Starbucks also did some executive compensation changes. So it's kind of like, these are the possibilities. These are some of the big changes. You may have seen some of these icons before, and I'm sorry that they're a little blurry, but I wanted to get them all in here. If you Google 17 SDG, you probably will see a good version of this. Back in 2015, the United Nations rolled out the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, saying that if we just keep doing what we're doing, we're not going to have a good result. So they came up with this pretty ambitious and audacious plan to say, we need a specific plan to keep the planet viable for future generations and also work on economic security for the whole world. So you will see these icons attached to many different investment products, because a lot of fund managers and other people are sort of tying what they're doing back to these goals. And they're something, I know you can't read them, so I'll tell you what they are. Kind of poverty, maternal health, climate change, life under the water, sustainable cities and communities. And if you're thinking about investments and what would be driving investments in the future, by 2030, it's estimated that $90 trillion will be invested through governments and private sector partnerships to achieve these goals. So that's what a lot of energy is going to be spent on achieving these goals. And the UN reports on this pretty continuously. And then just one more thing about the possibilities of this idea of investing for change as municipal bonds, which maybe sounds a little bit boring, but I got these examples from some mutual funds that are calling themselves green municipal bonds, specifically investing in bonds that are going to try to help people and underserved people. So for example, they were buying bonds in a community college in Salinas Valley. Salinas Valley is in California. It's where most of our lettuce and strawberries come from. And the college itself has a 65% student body that is Hispanic. Most of them are the children of migrant workers and guest workers. So investing in this college is investing in the education of an underserved group. There also were mitigation bonds in Texas where they're looking to increase the flood resiliency, making sure that the areas that are the most vulnerable, where people have the least capacity to do these flood mitigation measures, are implemented. But they're making sure that the bonds themselves are backed by county-wide property taxes. So it's not a question of the poorest areas not having the capacity to back the bonds. And so this, I think, is the question, Wendy, that you were getting at. And it's one of the biggest challenges that we are facing right now if you're interested in investing this way. And it's, where do you go if you want to know if the company you're interested in or the fund you're interested in is really doing what it says it's doing as far as achieving ESG goals. And this example is 25 different stocks and 6 different rating agencies. So each of those little dots of a different color is a rating agency's The ones that are most relevant to the United States are the Sustainalytics and the MSCI. And you can kind of see that these are the 25 stocks that had the biggest disagreement among rating agencies. So that you can see that there are stocks here where some of them were rated very highly, and then some of them were rated either neutral or very poorly. Because some of the ratings agencies, they're all collecting their own data. Disclosure from companies is at the moment voluntary. And then companies, these rating agencies have their own criteria. So it's a real issue. One of the companies that was on the list is Intel. They make semiconductors, and they scored poorly among some ratings companies because they had significant incidents involving business ethics and customer quality and safety. But then they get high scores from other companies, either for their commitment to employee diversity or being able to employee empowerment issues and strong management teams. Microsoft is the same way. Some ESG funds, ratings companies give them a high mark because they score high on equal pay, diversity, their support of BIPOC and LGBTQ communities, but their large ICE contract gives other people pause. So this kind of brings us into another challenge that people have if you want to do investing in this manner, and it's called greenwashing. I've also heard it called woke washing. And the idea is that you can, by naming something, give it the appearance or the halo of these qualities that people are seeking out. And especially because now in the United States, and we're way behind Europe on this kind of thing, you can emphasize positive results without giving equal weight to negative information. And also there's not a lot of rules about what you can name something. Morningstar, which is a ratings agency for investments, they do star ratings also, where they can rate mutual funds based on their past performance and their risk, has a globe rating system for telling us whether a mutual fund is achieving its ESG risk management goals. And they say that 80% of mutual funds that say that they have an ESG have either 4 or 5 globes. And they were quoting that as sort of a statistic saying that the system works. But it also means that 1 out of 5 mutual funds that say that they are ESG or sustainable couldn't even get to an average kind of return as far as getting a good rating from Morningstar on their ESG. So to avoid greenwashing, you might have to dig deeper than just looking at the stated name or objective. I mean, it's a big challenge to look around and compare the names on more than one rating agencies. I mean, the SEC has announced repeatedly, when we got a risk alert from them, that it will be creating a regulatory agency to make sure that companies and managers are transparent and accountable, and whatever they say that they do, they actually did. But you should also be aware that because this is a new area, and for some companies and firms, this might be a work in progress. What may look like greenwashing is really people just sort of, finding their footing in this area. But hopefully this is an area that will be improving. And this is something that we know that regulators are working on. The SEC has mentioned this numerous times, that they will be looking into this and holding companies and fund managers accountable. The DOL is looking into specifically allowing this type of investment in our ERISA, retirement plans, but I'm sure that they will be holding people to the same standards. And then, as I said before, President Biden issued an executive order having the impact of climate change reported on all throughout our financial system. So here I think we are at the kind of the essential question of ESG, and it's been this question kind of for as long as I have been in the financial services industry. True or false, will you pay a performance penalty for investing in ESG? No, I can't see everybody, but what does everybody think? Well, it's kind of unclear. And if you said yes, you're not alone. 79% of investors are interested in sustainable investing, but 53% think that they will suffer a performance penalty for it. And so I did get some very fresh data, and it's a little bit frustrating. And it's related to the ratings data that I showed you before. The big ratings agencies right now in the United States are Sustainalytics, MSCI, and Refinitiv. Refinitiv used to be Thomson Reuters. And they basically, the Wall Street Journal took 500 stocks across these 3 rating agencies just from the start of the pandemic till now, and split them into 3 groups of average, good, and poor performers. And there wasn't a consistent result as to whether or not a good ESG rating resulted in good ESG performance. These graphs are showing performance. So for the Sustainalytics, the average companies beat the good and the poor. And under MSCI, the poor companies beat the average and the good. So it's really hard to come away with a strong takeaway from this information. And then the Refinitiv, see that. So in an attempt to kind of sift out maybe some of the recent data, or to maybe get another, like a longer and broader view, I did find 2 studies that were both long and hopefully broad. The Morgan Stanley Institute for Sustainable Investing looked at almost 11,000 mutual funds and exchange traded funds together over 14 years, 15 years. And they found that there was no difference for each fund relative to its benchmark in terms of performance. However, they did find that the ESG funds had smaller downside risk. So that was an encouraging result. The other study that I looked at was from Oxford. It's a study of studies, and studying, and it wasn't just environmental, it was ESG. So one example of the study was, if you made an index of the top 1,000 companies to work for and treated it like an investment index, what would happen? 88% of those studies showed that consistent ESG practices did lead to better operational performance, and 80% of the time, they did lead to sustainable, you could see it in the stock price. But I think it's still a little bit of an open question. So how can you engage with ESG? How are we doing that time? You still can, what most people are still doing now is avoiding the things that they don't like. But there's still a lot of opportunities coming online all the time for impact investing, where you can make a positive change, or thematic investing, which means that you choose an issue that's very important to you and invest around that. There's also ESG integrated portfolios, where you add in this ESG factor into the other traditional methods you would use to put together a portfolio. You might end up with some ESG and some non-ESG offerings in one portfolio. There's also shareholder activism. There's one website called asyousow.org where you can get more information about what's happening in that. And then there's also impact or venture philanthropy, which is making direct investments. It's still a charitable contribution for you, but it's more like making an investment in a company. And I'm kind of talking a little bit fast because I can see that we are getting close to the end of the hour. So what's the future of ESG? I mean, here are some of the things that I had been reading about. Hopefully that some of the customized indexing will be available to people at lower costs, that there'll be more ESG options in retirement plans like 401k plans and 403 plans. Right now in Europe, you can at a glance tell whether a company meets its ESG metrics or not, because they have binding criteria. More companies probably will be tying their executive compensation. And then the regulators are going to be getting more involved in disclosures and making some voluntary disclosures mandatory. Impact philanthropy, I think, is a growing field, and you can probably expect many more shareholder resolutions because of the success of ExxonMobil. And then here are some resources that you can use. My favorite podcasts are over on the left. Impact Adventures is taking those sustainable development goals released by the UN and taking one each week and going deep to find out what companies are making those happen. And then the websites I kind of already mentioned, As You Sow goes into shareholder resolutions, what's kind of happening there. Sustainalytics has a free section that you can use to see what companies, where they fall on their ESG map. And then the other USSIF is for education purposes, and the UN CDF is about the public and private partnerships that support those SDGs, those Sustainable Development Goals. And then our website is there too. I think that's it. Are there any more questions, Wendy?
I don't see. A few people have been writing in and making some great points. I'm going to invite folks to unmute if they want to, if they've got questions. We have about 10 minutes left, and we definitely do want to do our book drawing. But one of the things I was really curious about, Tanya, is what are you seeing? Are you seeing any patterns generationally? I mean, we've noticed sometimes that the age of the millennials and then the generation following, a lot of them talk about meaning and purpose and work. And I'm wondering how this translates to investing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that would have been a great slide. I think that as each generation gets younger, more people say that they would like to invest sustainably.
Yeah. And someone was asking if these slides will be available. I'm wondering if we can post them when we post the blog, Tanya. I think we can probably put the websites and resources down for sure. Is that
we definitely
right?
can do the resources and websites. Let me double check on the slides.
Yeah. Okay. I think if we were able to put some of these resources, that would be great.
Wendy?
Go ahead,
It's
Ellen.
Ellen. Can I ask a question?
Please.
It occurs to me within this, when we look especially at the S, the social piece, in terms of benefits and care for employees and an understanding of what it takes to make an effective organization that's solid, these are not things we necessarily apply to nonprofits. Okay, people want to see nonprofits spending the least amount possible in compensating people who work for them, in making resources available to them in order to be able to do that. We seem to have a skewed view of where that matters. And I'm just wondering if you've noted that too, because the argument is always that, no nonprofit should be spending more than X amount on overhead in terms, but it applies the same in being financially successful as it does in being service successful, in making sure the people that work for you are being respected and are being provided with appropriate resources and are able to then meet the needs that they need to do. So, and to be honest, within ESG, the range is huge. Okay, nobody should be investing in a company that has questionable ethics. I mean, corruption does not meet some kind of special level that we now have to pay attention to. And I am worried about looking at agencies setting criteria to measure some of these things, which are not as measurable as one may think. They aren't abstract. Many of these are subjective measures, and how you're going to rate them and how you're going to fill them in. And being transparent isn't always helpful. Sometimes you have so much data because everybody wants to know everything. The data doesn't inform anything. And so I just worry that we put confidence in doing some of these things, but these are really hard things to define and measure and determine what the impact really is. And within any of these, there are things that would matter to somebody and things that don't. And so if you're measuring all of those and saying that you have to meet all of these points in order to get somewhere, you may be devaluing a company that's actually doing a good job. because there isn't any, this is what I do. I mean, I study studies too. Okay. And this is one of the points that's always hard, is that everything doesn't have the same value. Many of these things need to be considered and looked at, but how do you determine how to weight those in coming up with a metric that people can feel confident in? And it still seems to me it's up to you and confidence in the people that are helping you in your investments and doing things to help to elicit what you mean by ESG as opposed to what someone else may mean by ESG.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to jump in if anybody else has an answer. I mean, right now we're looking at some third-party purveyors that are trying to get at those questions, that have the user weight the things that are important to them so that you can get to that answer. But you can't put like a 10 in every category.
Yeah.
You know, you have to pick and choose.
Yeah.
But I think your point about nonprofit employees is really good.
It bothers me because we tend to, we seem to skew that. So why do we not think the people that are providing nonprofit or, you know, services need to be treated in the same fair way we think everybody else should be, and that we don't recognize that the value coming from that does depend on how you treat your employees and how much they feel invested in what's going on and how respected they feel in their delivery. It's not a bad thing if someone's paying people a living wage in a nonprofit.
Agreed.
Yeah. Any other questions? Kevin comments that small nonprofits cannot meet those administrative, what is FR, financial resource criteria? Yeah, the math doesn't work.
Right.
Great. Any
I meant fundraising.
fundraising? Sorry, fundraising.
Could not mute fast enough to save you, Wendy.
I'm getting my acronyms.
But Kevin, fundraising is how you get financial resources. So it's the same thing.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was saying, that you can, a small nonprofit making like 100, 150 a year or less, can never meet that 15 to 20% admin fundraising, because even hiring so as somewhere, I think around 150, most to 200, most nonprofits then need to get into audits. Well, there goes $5,000.
Yep. No, absolutely.
Actually, in the Washington area, you will pay 10 grand for a small nonprofit audit.
Oh, that's what we're paying. Yeah.
And that's ridiculous.
Any other questions? I'm going to open up the, you guys can shift over to gallery view, or if you want to see each other. We have a book giveaway to do. And again, before we do that, I just wanted to thank our sponsors again. Kevin Howard, we did thank you before you got on, and Pickled Roots Publishing, thank you so much. And Tanya, thank you very much. There's so much to talk about here that I know just doing an overview can be really difficult, but I'm so glad that you offered to help us out with this topic. Thank you so much. I invite everybody to stay connected with C3MD. We are working soon on a membership drive. We would love for you guys to become members. There's some really awesome programming that we've had, and I encourage you to check out our blog at the Conscious Capitalism CMD.org website. You can usually find some recordings from past events. And I'd love for you to mark your calendars. We're not going to have a meeting in July. It's vacation time. People are traveling. But we will on Tuesday, August 17th, and it will be a conscious coffee. And we'll be talking about conscious culture, and hopefully actually even be giving some steps to enhancing your own conscious culture with Christopher Carter, who's an author and spiritual teacher. Meditation, and he's writing a book on leadership, and he has done a lot of big culture events for companies across the United States. So we're looking forward to that too. So without further ado, Ebony, can you hear me? Are you still on? I'm
Yes,
not.
I can hear you.
Can you please share the title of your book once again?
Yes,
And-
the title of my book is Leading Wise. Hard to see the subtitle, Inspirational Reflections for Corporate Leaders. And should I say something about the book? This book is a compilation of affirmations and sayings and wisdom from different wisdom traditions and spiritual communities that I have been a part of. And these communities shaped my 25 plus years as a leader in corporate America. And so it was time for me to put everything that I learned into a book to share with others.
Wonderful. So I put everybody's name on a piece of paper. I did not include board members to C3MD. And they're flipped upside down. I'm looking at you. I'm not looking at the paper as I'm shuffling. And I'm going to pick a name. Carol Marty. All right. Carol, you will have a book coming your way. How exciting.
Yeah, that is exciting. And I had a feeling it was going to be my name. So that's good.
I love it.
Thank you, Ebony.
Be sure to hang on with us so we can get your information. So I can get your information so that I can send a copy of the book over to you.
Okay, thank you. I will do that.
Ebony, since we were disqualified from this,
No.
where can we go to buy a copy of said book?
Sure. So the book is available on Indie Books as well as Amazon. You can get it there. And you can also send me an email and I can send you a link to purchase the book directly from me, which means you may get a handwritten note and perhaps some other goodies along with it.
Ooh. Would you mind putting your email in chat?
Yeah, sign me up for that.
I know. I want the hand delivered and blessing of the space option. I love it. Thanks so much, everybody, for coming. We're going to let you go a couple minutes early. Tanya, we really appreciate you. Thanks for the folks that haven't been here before. Please come back. We'd love to see you, but not next month. Go have fun. Thank you to all of the C3MD folks, and we appreciate you.
Thank you. See you in August. Be safe.